Hey, what's going on? I'm Matt O'Leary back with another video, and today we're going to be talking about cap space. But before we get started, I just want to mention that you can follow me on social media at Matt O'Leary NY on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all that fun stuff. And also, you could subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast. Call in, leave me a question. I'll try to answer it on the show. New episodes every Monday. So as of right now, the New York Jets have the fifth most cap space in the entire league at $24.7 million. And they could easily bump that up to $32 million if they cut Brian Winters. That adds 7.3 or 7.29, whatever it is, $million on top of what they already have. That would bump them up to third at $32 million, which I'm all for. Brian Winters, I don't think is going to have much of a role on this team. I would assume as of right now, Lewis and Van Roten are going to be your two starters, and Winters doesn't look like someone who's going to start on this team. It's always a good thing to have cap space when you're retooling or rebuilding. The Jets are probably somewhere in between. I don't expect them to be competitive in the sense that they are going all in for a Super Bowl this year. If they make a wild card spot, great in their eyes. I think that's about their ceiling, 9-win team maybe, and their floor is probably like a 6-win team. I think they're probably going to finish either 7-9 or 8-8, one of those two records. But the story here is with all the one-year deals that Joe Douglas gave out, he's very clearly looking at 2020 as a year of who am I going to keep around for the long term and build with. And then in 2021, I'm going to use all this cap space that I have and spend on guys that I think would be worthwhile to bring in here to build for the future and build a real contender here. And it's important to free up money whenever you can when you're rebuilding, like I said. But at $32 million, that still leaves you enough room to move to improve the roster for this year without completely breaking the bank and ruining your cap situation long term. The first very obvious move to me is signing Larry Warford. How he's still sitting there, I'm not quite sure. But this one's been something that I talked a lot about on this channel. A lot of Jets fans have talked about. It just makes too much sense. The guy is 28 years old. He's coming off a contract in which he was making an average per year per salary, however you want to say it, $8.5 million. I think his next deal is probably going to be between $8 and $10 million. So let's say you sign him for 3 years, $24 million, an average salary of $8 million a year, cap at $8 million. That's a complete upgrade over Brian Winters for essentially the same price. It makes too much sense not to do this. You add $1 million on top of what you would have paid Brian Winters for this year, and you completely upgrade that line. He would immediately come in here and be the best offensive lineman on the team without question. Like I said, he's in his prime, 28 years old, 3-time Pro Bowler in each of the last 3 years. This guy is really, really good, and how he's not signed, I'm not quite sure. And that's the first step that I would look to do in order to improve the roster for this year without completely blowing up the cap situation. The next one is a depth signing. I have a couple other depth signings that I want to talk about, and a position of need. I don't think Logan Ryan's going to come in here. At first, I was buying into the Manish Mehta report, but as this continues to drag on, I find it less and less likely that he signs, and they already have a decent amount of depth at that position for what they were able to do in the draft and trades at the draft, so I'm not necessarily sure they bring in a corner. But a position that I think would be important to bring in is an edge rusher. We saw a lot of guys' names being thrown in the bunch, like Jadeveon Clowney still available. Articles came out today saying, oh, with all this cap space now, are the Jets going to sign Jadeveon Clowney? I'd be really surprised, but someone who I think they could sign for pretty good value is Clay Matthews. So Clay got cut by the Rams. He's 34 years old, so he's not a spring chicken, obviously. But I think on a one-year stopgap, this would be a nice addition to play alongside Jordan Jenkins. Because let's face it, Jenkins is just like more of an edge setter, where Matthews does have some of the traits. Again, he's a little bit older, but he does have the traits to get after the quarterback. He had 8 sacks last year. And when you look at what his contract was, he was due to make like $4.625 million, something like that, for this year before he was cut. So I think you can get him for like a 1-year, $4 million deal. He doesn't have a ton of interest around him right now. I think it's a worthwhile swing for a relatively low cost at a position of need. And I think it would be a good mentor for guys like Jabari Zuniga. And if Bryce Huff makes the roster, maybe you could have him mentor. I just don't trust having a rotation of Basham and Zuniga and Huff on the other side. If you can get a veteran in here, a former captain, which is something that the Jets have gone very heavy in, I think that would make a lot of sense for this team. The last position I see a need at is wide receiver. So you have Mims, who you just drafted this year. I don't expect him to put up monster numbers. Maybe he gives you 5, 6, 700 receiving yards, somewhere in there. I think if he gives you over 8, that's phenomenal. I would not expect that. I think that's unfair too. In 2021, completely different story, but first year in the league for a second rounder, to expect him to come in and put up 800, 900, 1,000 receiving yards isn't really fair. Perryman on the outside is definitely a question mark. Yes, he was really, really good in the last 5 weeks of last year. First 11 weeks, not so great, and the rest of his career was fairly mediocre. But if he is the player that he was in the last 5 weeks, great. But again, there is definitely a little bit of a risk here, and he's only on a one-year deal. Crowder in the slot we like. He was really good last year for the Jets. After that, though, it's a complete crapshoot. So I think bringing in a veteran would make a ton of sense, and I would really like to bring in Taylor Gabriel. So he's 2 years removed from almost a 700-yard season. He had 688 a couple of years ago with the Bears. Did not have a good year last year at all with Chicago. That offense absolutely stunk, though, to be fair. And he's 29 years old, so he's not over the hill. He's on the back end of a wide receiver career, there's no doubt, but if you're bringing him in on a 1 year or a cheap deal, I think it makes sense for the Jets to add him in, because do you really trust Josh Doxson or Braxton Berrios to be your fourth wide receiver? He's a very versatile piece. He's someone that could get, yards after the catch pretty easily. He's a smaller guy. I think he's 5'9", and definitely he's someone who you can use on like ends arounds and stuff like that, which I think Adam Gase is the kind of guy who would like to implement that. He doesn't really have the personnel to do it, I wouldn't say necessarily, but if you have a small, speedy guy like this, I think it would make a ton of sense, and we know how much Joe Douglas really likes speed, which is a good thing. So I'll say a 1 year, $5 million deal gets it done for Taylor Gabriel, and that means Warford, Gabriel, and Clay Matthews would add up to $17 million, which would still leave you $15 million in cap space after that. And also 2 out of those 3 deals are 1 year deals. You could also get out of the Le'Veon Bell contract after this year if you like. You can get out of Henry Anderson's contract after this year if you like. You can create more cap space, and you're already expected to have a decent amount of cap space for 2021. So I think those 3 moves could help the Jets for 2020 and maybe push this from a team who, like I said, maybe is a 7 or 8 win team to maybe now their ceiling's 9 or 10 wins, and they're starting to maybe push for a wild card spot. And let me know what you think about the cap space situation in general, and then also if there's anyone left that you'd like to sign. Those are 3 guys that stand out to me and I think would make sense for this team, but definitely let me know. Thanks so much again for tuning in. Once again, I'm Matt O'Leary. Make sure to subscribe, and I'll talk to you next time.